podcast. My name is Tyler Bublitz, and welcome back to the third Sunday of Advent for the week of December 14th, 2025, and I'm excited to have you here. I'm excited to dig in this week's podcast, and I am excited, as I've stated before, being in Advent. I enjoy this time. There's been an Advent devotional I've been working through, and I'll probably shout it out at some point because I've been really enjoying it so far as we're working through Advent. But there is an aspect to Advent that is very self-reflective, and especially having worked in the church and now not working in the church, it's a very different feel, because in the church, this is a time where we're talking about self-reflection, we're talking about a lot of these things, but yet we are constantly busy, constantly trying to work on things, trying to get ready for Christmas, getting this ready, getting that ready. And in this case, where I'm at this moment within my life, I am able to really kind of slow down, not necessarily in every aspect of my life. And I also find myself right now wanting to slow down. Like I'm wanting to not have a lot to do, where I'm wanting to allow myself to rest, to allow myself to contemplate, and allow myself to really think about things. And I think that's healthy. And I think it's something that we as humans, and especially here in the United States, I don't think get enough time to actually do. We fill our time with a lot of other things, but we really don't allow ourselves that time to really think, contemplate, relax, process, slow down in order for us to process and do all these things. It's not something that's quick and easy to do. And so I think that's something that it's hard for us to do, but I think it's necessary. And it's one of the things as we kind of tie into the seasonality, at least here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're getting less and less light. And there is this natural thing of then slowing down and allowing ourselves to get into different projects or allowing ourselves to kind of do some type of recuperating. And I think that's an important aspect of this. And I think it fits well with the question that we had for last week is, how do you prepare in Advent? And I would argue that's part of the preparation is the aspect of slowing down, the aspect of allowing ourselves to contemplate and to think about things. And I think it's also recognizing the seasonality of where we are, not necessarily just weather-wise, but I think also within our own faith life, and recognizing that there are peaks and valleys, recognizing there are times that we are in huge growth seasons and times of huge contemplation and maybe harder times. And I've got some responses talking about that this week on how life changes things and we go through evolving and changing. And that means at times that we need to take a step back from doing things and allow ourselves to figure out what that next step is. And I think that's a big part of this. And I think it also really ties in really well with just Advent in and of itself and thinking about what that is all about. So let's just jump into it this week. The Old Testament text then is from Isaiah chapter 35, the first 10 verses of it. And this is one of those texts that, again, is promising the future of what the tribe of Israel is going to be like. And it's allowing the idea of the people of Israel are eventually going to go back, and what seems like a desert is eventually going to blossom. As they come back, this is going to allow for flourishing, and that there is going to be this holy highway that is traveled, and it's allowing even the ones who are struggle to continue on a path. Not even the fools will go astray, coming from verse 8. This idea on how God is going to provide something that, again, even as we've gone through this dry and wilderness in the desert, that you will find the blossoms, you will find this place of rejoicing and this place of being able to be where God has intended you to be. We have alternative Psalms this week, and one of those Psalms that you can choose from is from Psalm 146, verses 5 to 10. And this is this understanding on how the Lord is the hope in which we have. And when following that and recognizing that that this sets us free from our different oppressors. This is what fulfills us longer than what our bodies are able to do, that we are striving to follow after what God is doing and recognizing that the reign of what God is doing is forever and eternity. Meanwhile, our own human existence is only for a period of time. The other quote-unquote alternative psalm this week is actually out of Luke chapter 1, verses 46b to 55. This is Mary's song. This is after Mary has learned from Elizabeth that she is going to bear a child and it's going to be from the Lord. And so this is this psalm prayer that we get here in Luke of Mary acknowledging how she is humbled, she is fearful, but she is also rejoicing in this, recognizing that God has chosen her. And yes, this is a huge task, but yet I am going to give it my all and go after what God has intended for me to the best of my ability. And as I am waiting with anticipation on what that is going to be, I am excited to be able to carry out the promise of what has been promised from God to us. That then plays into the epistle text or second reading this week is out of James chapter 5, verses 7 to 10. This is then also this recognition on brothers and sisters in Christ, making sure that we are patient for what is coming, that we have to continue to be diligent. We have to continue to recognize that we are not the judge of each other, that that's what God's role is. And so that we have to be patient to recognize that God is coming and to stay steadfast in the word and keep our eyes focused on that instead of necessarily getting caught up in these other distractions that we can sometimes run and find ourselves in when we start trying to cast judgment on others. The gospel text this week then is out of Matthew chapter 11, verses 2 to 11. And this is a really interesting text this week. We have John the Baptist is in prison, and so he has his disciples like we talked about last week, and they are sent by John to go to Jesus to ask if this is the person that they have been waiting for, the tribe of Israel, or are they waiting for another? Jesus gives him kind of this weird answer, as Jesus typically does. He basically tells John, talk about what I've done. I've had the blind receive their sight, the lame to walk, skin diseases being healed, deaf hearing, dead raising, poor having good news brought to them, and blessed anyone who does not take offense at me, coming from verses 5 and 6. And then this continues on this idea on how, what were you expecting? What were you wanting? Were you wanting this prophet? Why did you go and chase after John the Baptist? And he gives this compliment to who John the Baptist is here in verse 11. Truly, I tell you, among those born of woman, no one is greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. This idea of how, yes, what you have seen and recognized with John the Baptist is amazing, and John has done an amazing job at laying the foundation, creating the way for me to walk down. But yet, John is just the beginning of what really it means and what really we're going to see in heaven as we then are coming together as the body of Christ in that. So, before we jump into how faith and science come together this week, we have to do our shameless plugs. Well, Working Preacher, if you haven't checked out Working Preacher, I'd highly recommend it. Between their Summer Brainwaves podcasts, their commentaries, their discussions. Since I'm not an ordained minister, I use them on a weekly basis to help give me some ideas, direction, different concepts and ideas to be thinking about. So if you haven't checked out workingpreacher.org, I'd highly recommend it. I'd also highly recommend checking out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt Student Library. I really enjoy how they lay out the text week to week, but I also really enjoy having art, prayers, hymns, daily readings to get into these texts, thinking about a lot of the different concepts of what is all going on, and especially in this Advent season, making sure that we are spending a little bit of additional time really thinking about that, really contemplating that, trying to put the different pieces together. So if you haven't checked out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt Divinity Library, I'd highly recommend that. Finally, I'd also highly recommend checking out the Green Blades Preaching Roundtable and the Green Blades Rising publication. This is either a weekly reflection or a monthly newsletter going through ecological echoes, implications, and urgencies to be brought into the weekly lectionary, similar to like what I'm doing, along with a lot of different events, notices, different ecological notes to be thinking about. And I find this extremely helpful. If you enjoy listening to this podcast for a half an hour each week, I know you're going to enjoy the resources over at Green Blades Preaching Roundtable and the Green Blades Rising publications. That'll be the first link down in the show notes. When thinking about this, there was something that really caught my ear this time going through these texts and thinking about it and contemplating it a little bit deeper. And having gone through the Revised Common Lectionary now multiple times, one of the things that I will say is I've always kind of been of this opinion of, can we just get to Jesus, especially when we start the early part of the year? I recognize Advent, okay, there's some different setups, but then after we get through Christmas, we get into, again, going through the baptism of Jesus, and we get a lot more John the Baptist. And I get it, John is leading the way, he's paving the way. But I also have kind of seen John at times as, let's get beyond John so we can get to Jesus. Let's get to the meat and potatoes of what's going on. But I think there was something really important this week that we really need to contemplate and to think about. And we need to get this understood so that we can actually get the heart of what Advent is really trying to get us to. John is in prison. John has trying to prepare the people for Jesus coming, or preparing for the Messiah to come. Jesus is out there doing things. He is baptized by John, but in the aspect of what John is expecting and what Jesus is providing are different. And so John is trying to figure out what is going on here. And I think it's easy for us being on this side of the cross to say, what are you even asking? We have to put ourselves, though, into the shoes of John or into the shoes of the disciples or the people there. We don't know what is still coming. We don't know the end of the story yet. It's still very much a story in progress. And so there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of ifs that are floating out there. And it's this question of, is this the right person to be hitching our wagon to? Or do we need to continue to be patient and wait, recognizing that God will continue to provide for God's people as God always has? What do we do? The patience that comes with that, and through contemplation, through work, but it's also that moment, that place where you're stuck in the in-between. You're stuck in, I don't know. I need more time to process. I need more time to think. I need more something. I need more showing of what Jesus is about. I need more examples. I just don't want to jump on and be a bandwagon. I really want to grasp this, understand this, think about this. It's going to take me some time. And that's a fair response. But it's also recognizing it's hard for us to get our head around that in a modern context. We're so used to knowing the whole story that it's really difficult for us initially to think that way. But I do have an example that I think this week really helps us to exemplify that in-between, that angst, the can we just get to the end of the story part that I think all of us can recognize and acknowledge. But it's also so important for us to be able to work through and recognize. Let's talk about chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or otherwise known as CTE. CTE is something that has probably been something, especially if you're a sports fan, has been something more in the vernacular over the last 15, 20 years in particular, and it's something that's being talked about more and more. But this isn't actually a new condition. In fact, if you look through the history of CTE, it was known at one point as punch drunk, that was noticed in the late 20s from boxers after getting a significant amounts of head trauma from blows repeatedly to the head, and noting the different cognitive, motor, and behavioral changes that came with that later on in life. And it took a lot of time for this to kind of build some momentum, and partially due to also the aspect on how the sports and different things that we're following and enjoying that we don't necessarily want to recognize that it's potentially also having damaging effects to the people, bodies and minds in particular throughout their life. And yes, this causes a lot of behavioral differences and things of that nature, but what is actually going on? What you can recognize at this point is it's continued trauma to the brain or skull, the brain probably hitting the skull, that is causing a lot of inflammation, and it's hurting the brain. And one of the things that they're noticing is that it's creating this protein of tau, and in that, then it's starting to degenerate the brain. And on top of that, that tau protein is also inhibiting the connection between the amygdala, which is doing the fight or flight and fear emotion within us, at least externally. And the weird thing with CTE that has been noticed and observed is, yes, outwardly, it seems like these people suddenly have no real fear, but inwardly, they still very much do and feel very trapped within their own selves, that they aren't able to truly be who they are. And in all of this research right now, the only way we can diagnose somebody with CTE is postmortem, or AKA after death, that we are able to look at the brains and notice how the brain has shrunk and is having certain lobes kind of collapsing in on itself, that yes, this person was suffering from CTE. Unfortunately, that makes it really difficult when someone's living to be able to recognize, is this something that's going on? Thus, even trying to then get to this point of us trying to treat this, or figuring out what the symptoms are, or trying to figure out how do we maybe work around this if we can't diagnose it unless it's after they are dead. And this is something that has gotten a lot of research, and there's starting to be some different biomarkers that they're looking into. Like I stated, the tau protein, and looking at and seeing if that has some different effects on being able to help us diagnose potential people. There's also been some research looking at why do some people seem more susceptible to CTE versus others, and recognizing that there might be some things within DNA potentially that makes certain people more susceptible to CTE versus other people. But again, this is a lot of early research, and it's hopeful. It's a lot of research that's providing us potential insights. And yes, we could be going down the right path, but we also could be completely off just as much. It leaves us in this weird spot where we need more research, we need more time, we need more processing, and yet we still have people who are suffering right now. And so we're in this weird in-between where the only thing that we really can do is give grace and be patient as the science is trying to catch up to the problem that we have. And as we continue to try to develop ways to maybe help prevent it, we really don't know, and it's going to take a lot of time to recognize what's being quote unquote prevented with some of the different measures that we're taking. We're in that in between. We're in this moment of questioning, are we even doing the right thing? How much of a risk is it? If it's related to certain DNA, could you necessarily see if certain people are more susceptible or not? Or is this something that hits the same way across the board for everybody? It's just a question of if you are taking these types of traumatic brain hits more consistently. It's a lot of questions. But I also think back to think about Mary's song of, yes, she's so glad of magnifying and acknowledging what she's about to do. But is there also not this fear of, well, what does this also mean for me? What does this also mean for the life that I have? What does this mean for Joseph, for goodness sakes, at this moment? I'm excited about what's coming, but this is also going to make things a little bit weird and awkward, and I don't know what that's all going to entail. It's not just a child, and remember, this would be her first child. It's just also going to make things awkward that Joseph, what's going on there with that whole aspect of things. We have to remember the people of Israel who have been wandering around in the desert for decades, being promised the promised land, and how that must have at times felt far-fetched. And what does it mean when it's the land flowing with milk and honey? What does that truly mean? We can assume that it's going to be well-fed and taken care of and things are going to go well, but what does that truly mean? What does that truly look like? It's easy for us to get caught daydreaming on what that's going to look like. But isn't that also what John kind of gets caught up in? He gets caught up in the aspect of daydreaming on what this is going to be like, so that when John is in prison, he's questioning, is Jesus really the person that we have been longing for, that we've been desiring for, as we are trying to understand here at this moment, who is the Messiah, if the Messiah is truly there? Are we doing the right research? Is the different proteins of tau and looking in the DNA going to be biomarkers and things of that nature that are going to help us break open the doors to understanding CTE at a much higher level? Maybe. Or maybe it just helps us better understand ourselves and we're still decades away from getting our hands around CTE. It's difficult for us to understand. It's difficult for us to be in that moment and understand where we are at. But that's also how Jesus gives it to us. I think this is intentional as well, and especially when we're in the Advent season. Jesus isn't just saying, I am, at this moment. Jesus is laying out the evidence of what Jesus has done, but it's still John's decision. It's still John who is going to take that information and have to consider it. And Jesus then is also laying out this whole case on, you are quick to follow John, but why are you questioning me? There's a lot of questions that are built and around this text that gets us to that place. And in all of this, what is being demonstrated? Jesus is demonstrating to John that you need to have patience, and the way that you're anticipating that I'm going to come is maybe not the way that I'm going to come. Jesus giving a lot of patience to John in that there's questions, but we don't necessarily see Jesus getting upset. It's Jesus then, I'm just going to lay out the case, you come to your conclusion. And we even see that with the disciples that are there. You come to that conclusion. I think within the world in which we're in, it's really easy for us to make snap decisions, to make quick judgments, to they're part of this and I'm part of this. Make all these decisions prematurely in a lot of ways. And what does that actually do is it doesn't give us the opportunity to practice patience. In a world in which things move faster and faster, it's easy for us to give excuses on why we should or shouldn't have patience. And it's something that I've learned within doing life of being married now and going through that process and working with someone else. Patience is necessary and needed for us in this life. And I've definitely not always been great with that. And it doesn't just carry into my personal relationships, it carries to all the different relationships that I'm a part of. And I think that's something that we constantly have to be thinking about. We want God to respond quickly, and I think God shows multiple times over and over and over. That's not how I operate. We get James talking about preparing for the second coming, and we're still preparing. We had the people of Israel wandering around in the desert for 40 years before getting to the promised land. We have all the different prophets of Isaiah and Ezekiel laying out what Jesus is going to be centuries before it happens. I think this is a moment to us to recognize that a lot of things within this life, sometimes things will move quickly, yes, but a lot of times it's going to require a lot of patience. I think all of us, as much as we would like, we love to have the understanding of what exactly causes CTE, the aspect that we're able to diagnose living people with it. And from doing that, we would be able to understand so much more. It would give us insights into then how do we treat this? How do we prevent this from being something that's caused in general? So many questions, like we've talked about, good science leads to additional questions. With the results of something like that would lead to a lot of additional questions on how do we help prevent things? How do we help treat different aspects of CTE? It makes it easier in a lot of ways. It's less ambiguous. But we have to remember that's the God in which we serve, that yes, God is direct, but a lot of times, but for us to understand it, it becomes ambiguous. And I feel like in a lot of ways, that's where we are at. As we are in this Advent season and preparing for what's coming next, we have to be patient. There's no one to get mad about. If anything, it's getting frustrated with God. But I think God would just respond with, don't you understand? By this point, this is part of my character. Just because you think it's in your time that this is the way that something should be done does not mean that I believe the same way. It's rough watching different people who we have watched 20 years ago suddenly wrestling for their lives with CTE. And we get it confirmed after their death that that's what they were fighting. It is difficult, but we have to acknowledge that the scientists are working hard, that they are making headway, and it's just going to take some time. Jesus was out and amongst the people doing things that still took time. For one, Jesus to be ready to die for our sins. For two, for the people to understand truly what was going on. And for three, to get to the part where we're familiar with it. That gives us the confidence to talk about it so confidently. They're not to that point yet. And we can't get mad at them for that. We have to embrace that and acknowledge that within them. CTE research is still very much in early stages and they're figuring things out. We are further along and this is giving hope. But we have to be patient and not get ahead of ourselves. And isn't that a lot of what this part of the Advent season is? Not getting ahead of ourselves. It's hard not getting ahead of ourselves, especially with how Christmas is advertised to us, that suddenly after December 25th, it's no longer a thing. But that isn't, as Christians, what we're truly told. And we're in the season of preparing, and that also means our hearts. One of the things that I have found multiple times over, whenever I'm wanting some type of scientific breakthrough, sometimes it is that we're not ready for it. Is that part of what we need to acknowledge? It appears with the research that we're getting out of CTE that maybe we are on the right page and we're getting somewhere, and it is providing us hope to be able to help get our arms a little bit further around what CTE is. Jesus, in particular here in verse 5 into verse 6, here in Matthew 11, is laying out the case of, look at what I have done. You make that decision. I'm not here to make that decision for you. Just because I'm not coming in the way that you would expect does not mean that I am not here. As we come into the Christmas season, and especially as we are in this Advent season, I think that's a fair thing for us to be remembering. Just the way that we sometimes anticipate and think things should be isn't necessarily going to be the way that they are. And we have to remember that and hold on to that and embrace that. And that often means patience. So the question I have for you this week is, where are you practicing patience during Advent? Where are you practicing patience? Because for me, I think one of the ways that I am trying to do it is by slowing down and meaning that I have to be patient. Not everything's going to happen today. Not everything is going to happen tomorrow, and being okay with that. And I think that's a valuable lesson to be thinking about and a valuable thing for us to be contemplating in this Advent season. Because if we never slow down, if we never truly allow ourselves to be patient and recognize the patience that is required within Advent leading into Christmas, I think there is something that we miss. And even if we had the exact way on how all of this came together from CTE, I think it would just leave a lot of questions on why. And it wouldn't cure our quest for understanding things. And I think that's one of the hearts of the whole research right now. Yes, it's about caring about people, but it's also for us to understand. And it's always good to understand, because through understanding, then we can better understand who our God is. In doing that, we realize that it's going to continue being worth the wait. So, we'll wrap this up as we always do. I pray God blesses you through your faith and amazes you through science.